can go when you want. We'll leave a few minutes on.
Hi, it's Carol Salter reading her last chapter in Witch on the Warpath. We've got to the end of this. This is week 34 from when I started in April 2020. We'd left our people all at the Westwood. We had Dog, Shine, Hearty and Onk, and Gristle the Witch had just appeared. And Onk wasn't happy. Let's see what happens on this, the final chapter. Chapter 35, Heart's Desire. As already said, it is difficult to place a spell on a troll. Spells have a tendency to slide around them, a bit like the invisible Lenny. Gristle's first spell did just that. It caught the split ends of Onk's hair, turning them from wayward and wiry to lank and lifeless. The bulk of the spells hit the trees outside the courtyard, which had been in the process of materialising. A nanosecond later, and it would have hit the inside of the courtyard wall and bounced back onto Onk. Gristle's spells were designed to cause the most distress and havoc to a troll. This one was supposed to make Onk's body soft, squidgily and pliable. Instead, it made the row of oak trees outside the new courtyard floppy and bendy with soft cushiony edges. They waved and sighed in gentle silliness, bending down to the ground. Their branches lay in wavy lines, except one, which broke off and fell inside the courtyard. It was wiggly and soft like a flump. The ones outside looked like rows of mowed corn dreading the hay baler. Hearty and Shine witnessed the result of Gristle's first attempt to harm Onk. Hearty was horrified. When he heard her begin chanting again, outside the castle walls they couldn't be much help. As fast as the wind they flew over the high walls. Dog, staggering and unsteady, came flying with a small orange creature lodged between his shoulder blades. He dropped down next to Hearty and Shine, who was standing on the castle battlements, leaning forward between the stones. Filled with malice at losing her first and most impressive spell, Gristle began to weave her second. Another great choice, she thought, an opposite spell, designed along similar lines to the first. It was supposed to make a troll the very opposite of what he was. Where Onk was strong and fearless, weakness and fear would result. Where tall and broad held sway, short and skinny became the rule. It was at this point in the battle that Lenny arrived on the scene. He was miffed at Gristle over her previous treatment of him. He'd realised somehow she'd hoodwinked him, and he was determined to make her pay. He'd located her by following the mayhem surrounding Onk, his friends, and the witch. The local shopping centre, the Cross, was bounding with a huge plague of rabbits. A number of fairy agencies, including the East Kent coastal branch of the Elf Service, were busy sorting out the real from the transformed. Putting the human world back together was time-consuming, and few staff were free to look for Gristle, apart from a starling called Nigel. Nigel was dispatched on reconnaissance. Lenny followed Nigel over from the Cross and spied Gristle disappearing into the Westwood. He began his payback by jeering at her from a safe distance. He called Gristle all sorts of names, using a variety of different voices. "Potato head!" "Spotty dog breath!" were some of the nice ones. When Gristle failed to respond in his direction, he knew she couldn't see him, as he earlier supposed. He was enjoying being rude to her. To be honest, He was muttering most of the words under his breath. But he was moving closer. It was only a matter of time before she heard him and guessed he was back. Part of Lenny was afraid of Gristle should she look him in the eye, so he made sure he stood with his back to her, stepping closer with each nickname. How Lenny ended up standing between Gristle and Onk as she threw her second spell, he didn't know. Being invisible, he'd become nonchalant about such things over the years, until Gristle. Since he figured out she'd been lying to him about being able to see him earlier, it never occurred to him the spell, aimed at the troll, would affect him. The opposite spell hit Lenny full on, sparkling and glittering over him like a sparkly glittering suit. "Oh!" wailed Lenny as the tingling feeling coursed through his body. Hearty and Onk recognised the voice as the one Onk had thrown from the train. "Oh, ow, I don't like," came a further utterance. Out of the ether reappeared Lenny. Lost to every dimension for over 80 years, everyone saw a small, naked, grey-haired and grey-bearded old man. Luckily for everyone present, Lenny hadn't cut his hair or beard for decades, so they covered the important things. It was clear to the others that Lenny didn't know he was visible. The opposite spell had done its job well. Lenny continued standing in front of Gristle. He'd taken courage from the supposed harmless spell and turned around. He stood pulling faces at Gristle till she spat at him. "Get out of my way, you idiotic moron!" Arms crossed on her chest, Gristle turned her malevolent eye at Lenny. The others used Lenny's accidental distraction to fly down onto the courtyard grass. Lenny glanced behind him, thinking Gristle was talking to someone else. Finding no one nearby except her opponent, he looked back. He rethought her words. "Yes, you idiot! Move!" she shrieked at Lenny. "And go and put some clothes on while you're at it, numbskull!" Speechless, Lenny moved to one side of the courtyard, joining the two elves, baby dragon, and small tangerine cat, who was staring at him in surprise. Lenny leaned back against the inner castle wall in shock and 100% visibility. Gristle began casting her third backup spell. Not so impressive this time, a location hex, but it would have to do. Cast correctly, it sent the object or person to another place or dimension. The distance depended on the skill and experience of the caster. Gristle hadn't spent much time to practice. She'd only been able to manage sending a squirrel a quarter of a mile, but that would have to do. If she practiced more, she might have been able to send on further, but she never bothered. She could hear her mother going on about practice makes perfect. "Stupid woman," she mumbled, her annoyance at her memory spurning her on, together with the fact she spied a suspicious-looking walnut dangling around the troll's neck. Hearty decided more immediate action was needed to save Onk's life. "Do something, Onk!" he yelled from across the courtyard. Onk looked round. He saw his friends and he waved, smiling with relief when he spied Dog 2. "Do something!" Hearty called again, cupping his hands round his mouth in an effort to help his shout go further. Hearing Hearty's instruction, Onk scanned the terrain. There were no weapons to hit the witch with, or spears to throw at her. He noticed the fallen log inside the courtyard. At a pinch, it might serve as a club, he decided, till he bent to collect it. Armed with a piece of oak, which was bending over his arm like a pathetic piece of taffy, Onk realised the best thing he could throw at the horrible old witch was himself. Gristle had never beheld a stampeding adult male city troll. The sight was awesome. Imagine thousands of pounds of overripe, maturing flesh aimed at you with the intent to kill or maim. She panicked, and who could blame her? Backing away from Onk, she sped up her incantation. Onk roared as he thundered on towards Gristle, alarming every animal for miles. Woodland creatures that hadn't fled before did so now, as Onk roared continuously. Wildlife, unable to move quickly enough, died of heart failure or stroke. Rooks rained down upon the courtyard. At the cross over the roundabout, the fairy mop-up crews lifted their heads. Gristle, it seemed, had been found. Who would get their target first? The witch's spells were dependent on her innate ability. The stronger her nature, whether good or bad, the more powerful her spells. And Gristle was evil to the bone. It didn't bode well for Onk, who had his humongous voice and his fearsome charge. What was Gristle's third spell? Hearty wondered. Hearty never saw the outcome of Gristle's final spell. As Gristle reached the beginning of the last line of the spell, Onk reached her. Onk didn't really think out his plan very well. He still had the limp log dangling from one arm. Manoeuvring it into a better position, he went sprawling, not unlike a hippopotamus doing the samba. His fall took him straight into Gristle's arms. In the moment before Onk's tumble, Hearty could have sworn he saw Krog, the Neef Demon, again. Hearty would never forget those eyes. He shuddered, remembering his recent kidnapping. On the far side of the courtyard, a pair of slitty eyes peered out from a tear in the dimensions. Krog was watching the battle and enjoying it. His eyes, crinkled at the corners, laughed at Onk's mishap. Hearty followed the direction of Krog's stare, forcing his own eyes away from Krog and back to Onk. Recovering his feet, Onk abandoned the log and without thinking hoisted Gristle up into the air, holding her in a breath-removing bear hug. Gristle was so terrified she paused in her last casting words, thinking she knew what was going to happen. She closed her eyes, accepting her fate. Onk's primeval instinct was to squash Gristle flat into a Heath Witch smoothie. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. He wasn't that type of troll anymore. The warring conflict in his head ceased. His thoughts finally cleared, and he remembered the trust of the young boy, Fim, the friendship of Tiny and Robin and Shine, and most of all the unconditional love he felt from Hearty and Dog. He was better than this. He didn't need to destroy. He could let go of his anger instead. For a few frozen moments, Onk stood there, growling at the hateful witch in his arms, wanting to snuff out her life. Everyone was astonished when Onk roared to the heavens and, surging forwards, slung Gristle across the courtyard with all the power his body could muster. Gristle shrieked in hysterical alarm, flailing her arms and legs as she careered through the air straight towards the rip in the dimensions. Stopping a spell in mid-sentence is perilously dangerous. When it happens, the power of the spell usually inverts, falling upon the caster. Gristle's relocation spell worked well, despite the fact she hadn't finished her casting or named the location. As she sailed across the clearing of the rip to the neath dimensions, they stretched to a size of a witch. Krog, standing on the other side, was stunned. When the weight of Gristle landed on him, knocking him flat, he was flabbergasted. One lasting image remained, of Gristle bashing the dumbfounded demon over the head. Then the rip snapped shut and vanished. Somehow, Hearty felt sure it wasn't the last they'd seen of Gristle or Krog. Hearty, Dog and Shine rushed to Onk's side. He remained standing where he was, but didn't acknowledge their presence. His eyes were open, but he was silent and intent, apparently listening to something or someone. After a short while he turned his head and looked up at the castle's highest tower. The friends followed Onk's gaze and watched in wonder. The top tower shimmered and shook, changing shape before their eyes into a huge purple dragon the size of a house. It was magnificent, with azure wings, its eyes closed. Dog let out a massive squeal of delight and launched himself skyward. Cooing and purring, he flew upwards towards his mother and home. The dragon's eyes, hearing the squeal of recognition, opened. They were golden and glowing with happiness. The dragon queen trilled to her young pup as he flew up to join her on the top of the castle where they embraced. The woodland reverberated to the sounds of the mother and her son greeting each other in a variety of hoots and barks. Dog settled down into the crook of his mother's front right shoulder joint. She smiled down at the group below with far too many teeth for Hearty's way of thinking. Mind speaking, she spoke to Onk alone. She thanked him for looking after her child while she'd been caught in the enchantment. When the mother dragon finished speaking, another female voice started singing. It was pure and deep and note perfect. The mug-lump Parsley, who'd come round after his faint, missing all the action, smiled in wonder, for he knew the words she sang. A maid was true and fought for right. The price she paid was dear. But now comes one with heart and might to give their love so clear. Stand still, stand high, a sacrifice to all is nigh. Amongst Onk's assortment of treasures around his neck, a pink glow appeared. It grew in intensity, light seeping out from the walnut shell. It expanded along the edges, till the nut sat like a star plucked from the firmament, amid Onk's other possessions. Onk seemed to know what to do next. He'd known all along that the babe wasn't his to keep. He was minding her until she was needed. He opened the nutshell, and the light poured forth. Turning the shell over gently, he tipped the cocoon out onto his over-large palm. Raising his arm, he lifted the tiny cocoon in his hand up as a sacrifice to the castle. Hearty and Shine gasped in horror. There was a tremendous crash and a massive implosion as the veneer that was the castle collapsed in on itself and was no more. The enchantment broke as Onk gave up his heart's desire. The dragons hovered overhead watching, suspended in mid-air now the castle had vanished. Beneath the dragons, on the circle of grass, in front of the ordinary Victorian house, stood a beautiful troll maid. She came complete with shining green eyes and long golden hair the colour of the dragon's eyes, the archetypal Valkyrie. Onk was overwhelmed. He gasped as indescribable emotions welled up from deep within his soul. Dropping to one knee, head bowed in supplication, he held up his most beloved possession out towards the mysterious maid. The babe was for her to do with what she pleased. She smiled at Ankh. Reaching down, she took the unborn child in her hands. The troll's fingers touched during the brief exchange, and a charge of static electricity seared through Ankh's body. He felt excited and calmed at the same time as memories forgotten for eons flooded his brain. Neural connections long since atrophied sparked and flared to life. After centuries of living in darkness, the race of trolls could begin its journey to regain its once proud heritage. Still smiling at him, the maiden released the infant from the safety of her enchanted cocoon. Hearty and Shine held their breath, amazed and dismayed that the maiden was able to unseal the cocoon. They'd heard the stories of trolls eating babies. Maybe, Shine thought, he is offering the babe as a prized delicacy. She nudged Hearty, thinking to motivate him into action. Hearty smiled at her, but did nothing. He trusted Ankh with his life. Hope had followed Gristle the length of southeast England. She travelled down the broken path without Gristle's knowledge. From the safety of the tree line, she watched Ankh battle with his conscience, holding Gristle in his arms. Now she wanted to scream that the baby wasn't safe, but she didn't. She prayed to the goddess and held her breath too. For what seemed like an eternity, though in reality it was just seconds, the troll maiden did nothing obvious. She stood watching the fairy babe as she in turn woke up and smiled up at the maid. Holding the babe with reverence, which Hope took as a good sign, the maiden walked over to where Hearty and Shine hovered a few feet off the ground. Bending down, the maiden handed them the child, making sure both Hearty and Shine's hands were holding the infant together. Hearty and Shine were astonished. They looked at each other as if noticing each other for the first time. Then they looked down at the infant nestled between their hands. They smiled the deepest, knowing smiles, smiles of love and wonder. It was the last thing either of them expected. It dawned on Hearty he'd given the most precious life of his own unborn daughter over to a troll to care for, a troll with a witch chasing him halfway across the country. He felt overwhelmed with emotions, his wing tips in a blur of motion. He could have saved himself a lot of bother by taking the baby from Ankh in the beginning. But then he never would have met Shine. His Shine. His wings settled as he looked at Shine, the woman he loved. His heart turned over in his chest, his mouth dropped open, and later he swore his tongue lolled out. His eyes beheld the most beautiful vision of loveliness he had ever seen. In front of him floated Shine, grinning at him, without the usual mist obscuring her outline, even vaguely. She stood before him as clear as day, naked. He gazed around in panic to see if anyone else had noticed this vision of perfection, this Venus de Milo. Amazingly, nobody seemed interested in looking at Shine. They were staring at him. He glanced down. It wasn't a dream. He had his clothes on. He looked back at Shine. She giggled and mouthed the words, "Only you, Hearty." Her body shone like a tiny sun, and it was glorious. He wasn't dazed or confused around her anymore. He could think straight, despite Shine being unclothed. Shine was radiant. Her secret dream had come true. a child, a daughter no less, and a mate too. With the bonding of the child between them, Hearty would never succumb to her glamour again. He'd be true and honest with his emotions towards her as her life partner. They smiled again at each other as the realization of this moment sunk in. They continued to stare in wonder at their new baby daughter, Purity. A little way off, Onk hugged his new mate. In the manner of trolls everywhere, Onk grabbed her round the waist, heaving her up over his shoulder where she giggled adoringly. With a slight lurch, he rebalanced his beloved's weight to a more comfortable angle and sped off at a fast trot. Whether the couple would settle in Thanet or head back to London would be the subject for another day. Today there were more important troll traditions to be upheld. From high up in the ether, a blue-tinged dimension portal appeared. It was askew with Earth's time frame, causing it to shimmer in the lower atmospheric regions. From the edge of the blue tinge, Dog watched Onk leave. He was sad to be losing his new friend, but happy at finding his mother and a way home. He watched Onk retreat down the path, a large bundle of clothes chuckling over his shoulder. At the gates, Onk stopped, as if remembering something. He turned, put his beloved down for a moment, and glanced along the now shortened path. He waved farewell to Hearty and Shine, then looked up into the sky, where he saw Dog turning to enter the blue portal. "Onk, remember Dog!" Onk bellowed. Dog yelped in happy surprise at Onk's words. Gaining a nod from his mother on the border of the world, Dog flew down to give Onk one last flaming lick. Onk rubbed his singed left arm and grinned. Hoisting his beloved up over his right shoulder, he continued on his way. Dog and his mother shimmered, disappearing into their own magic dimension. As Onk and his new love left the westward far behind them, Hope the Watcher emerged from behind the stone gate. Tears cascaded down her face. She had watched the enchantment lift from her tiny charge, and then her parents' identity become known. Both were shocked, unaware of their intended roles. Instead of claiming their daughter, as was the normal custom, their daughter was bestowed upon them by a higher being. It had been a special and auspicious union, an event which hinted of greater things to come. Smiling in satisfaction, Hope turned to go, her presence unnoticed, her 100% success rate intact. At her feet, an orange cat appeared. He squinted up at her face, wet with happy tears, turned into an orange squirrel and scampered away. Hope passed Lenny, heading towards the cross. She guessed he was planning to ask for help and clothing from the local elf service. She wasn't sure if he fit their criteria for care since their recent restructuring. More a case for the department providing care and mission housing support. CAMS, she thought, as she took the road heading back home to London and Hampstead Heath. The world changed for Hearty and Shine from that day. Their new daughter Purity grew slowly in the manner of fairies everywhere. She inherited features and talents from both her parents. Her beauty and the ability to bedazzle males came from her mother. Her wisdom and ability to heal trees came from her father. Most amazing of all, however, and the talk of the southeast coast, was her phenomenal strength, inherited, of course, from her uncle, Onk. And that's the end of Witch on the Warpath. I hope you've enjoyed all the book. I'm going to make a few acknowledgements now and thanks, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'd like to thank the authors Tara Moore, Eric Bartholomew, the late Jackie Emery, Tricia Brady and Karen Ince for their unfailing support, friendship, patience, and awesome writing abilities. My final proof editor, and one I highly recommend, is Graham Pierpoint. My final formatter, Jeff Fisher, was my publication saviour. Inspiration's writing group members have kept me sane and supported me through my writing career without even realising it. I'd like to thank Jim Scott for some of the illustrations of the characters in this book. I'd also like to thank Mr. Mann, who was my teacher in my primary school, Holy Trinity, Margate, and Mr. Peter Ford, my English teacher in Lausanne Secondary Modern School, Margate. Both of these teachers gave me literary opportunities which started my reading and later writing career. Their input to me was inspirational. They gave me the confidence to believe in my own potential. Neither of these schools have survived, but the lessons I learnt there live on. I would like to give special thanks to Ian Mather from Quex Barn, who provided me, and always does, with a sanctuary in which to write, and who supports my work by selling hard copies in his store. I'd also like to thank all those individuals who have ever said to me, "Carol, you can do it." Thank you. And finally, none of this would have been possible without the hard work, commitment and time of my son, David, who has spent many an hour sitting, I don't know which way round you are, there he is, out of shot, while I record hours and hours of this book. Thank you, David. Thank you for everything you've done, and I really appreciate it. He's a great lad. And if anybody else requires any editing services, I'm sure he's approachable for a small fee. And before I go, where can you get the book? You can buy hard copies on my via my website, carolmsalter.com, and that will lead you to my e-store for all my books in hard copy. You can also buy them on eBay. If you'd rather use digital, you can buy Kindle editions of all my work on Amazon. And finally, I think perhaps a sneak preview of book 2, which is also out. It's only a little bit. The sound of a newborn baby's mewls filled the smoky air. It was always dark, and he was always hungry for food, attention, and love. Only one of these needs was ever met. And that's an excerpt from book 2. I think it's up here somewhere. Gristle's Revenge. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is. Okay, so anybody who's interested, that's the next one. And I'm just finishing book 3, which is Quest for Courage, which is now a series. Okay, please leave any comments. If you'd like to give me a thumbs up, I'd appreciate that. I've only had one in 34 weeks, but I'd love another one. And if you'd like to leave any review, that would be great too. Next time we're going to be doing bloopers, and after that I am going to start reading from some of my anthologies, which are also over here, some of my stories out of my anthologies. Please think about subscribing, because you'll get to know all about those, and they are not some of them for sale. Okay, thank you, and stay safe and well, everybody. We'll be here for you. Bye.